if we look at the world situation in perspective, let's say for over a period of 50, 60 years after World War II, or after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we could say that there has been tremendous progress. For instance, progress in the culture of acknowledgement of the universality of human rights, of justice, of rule of law, democracy, etc. I remember only like 15, 20 years ago, some forces here in Asia, particularly articulated by the then Prime Minister of Malaysia, Mahathir, they were arguing about the so-called Asian values as in contrast or as a challenge to the universality of human rights. Back then, I was one of those who actively countered that kind of argument of Asian values, as if Asian values allow torture, summary arbitrary arrest, disappearances, killings, etc. Fortunately, that argument disappeared quickly as Asians more and more affirm also their democratic rights, beginning in the 80s with the Philippines, Republic of Korea, Thailand, and then in 1988, 89, Indonesia, flourishing democracy. So in that regard, the universality of human rights, universality of freedoms, of democratic principles, practice, widely accepted. So that is progress. And there is less and less impunity in that, again, 30 years ago, governments were able to torture, imprison their own people, and they had the audacity of saying these were internal matters. Well, human rights are not internal matters. When you torture, you imprison people, these are not internal matters. And again, that is becoming less and less of an argument. There is more of a proactive intervention by the United Nations through relevant mechanisms like the Human Rights Council, the special rapporteurs, Security Council, etc., that inquire, that issue reports, threats, pressure, sometimes sanctions on the countries that violate human rights. On the issue of wars, unfortunately, that has been more or less unabated. Again, if we look at the historical perspective, maybe there has been improvement, obviously, if you compare World War II. But even if we compare with the 60s and 70s, we had extraordinary violence. Cambodia, the killing fields. We had the Balkans War in the 90s. We had Rwanda in 94. Or even before that, we had a war of partition of independence of Bangladesh. 2 to 3 million people killed in less than 1 year. So compared with all of that, of what happened 20, 40 years ago, situation is much, much better, but we still have the ongoing problem in Congo and Southern Sudan, conflict with the north. Darfur is not over in terms of the displaced refugee people. And the problem is in North Africa, in the Sahel region, and not to mention in Asia, Afghanistan, instability and uncertainty in Afghanistan in 2014 onwards, following the withdrawal of the US and NATO. And Pakistan, tremendous instability and challenges there. Bright spots, Myanmar. Still, they have taken few steps out of many hundreds of steps they have to take, but at least few steps in the right direction. But we still have the great danger of North Korea. Highly unpredictable, one of the worst, I would say, in our lifetime, today in this 21st century. North Korea is the single most anachronistic regime on the face of the earth. I don't know whether it can be comparable to any other regime except maybe to Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, with the exception that Khmer Rouge didn't have nuclear weapons. And we don't know much of the scale of the suffering in North Korea, as we didn't know in the beginning in Cambodia. Then when we found out too late, it was horror. Well, I hope we will not find out that after all millions died of killing and starvation in North Korea. And the fact is there is very little we can do about it. The US, Japan, Republic of Korea and others have been doing their very best to try to A, persuade North Korea to abandon nuclear weapons, B, to open up, at least for humanitarian. China is doing more than it's given credit for. I have ongoing conversations with the Chinese, and I know behind the scenes, in the Chinese way, they also, they don't tell it publicly, but they share the concerns of the United States and others in relation to the unpredictability of North Korea, because it is their neighbor, so they have to handle it with extra care. So that's where we are. Some very good notes, but some that is still of tremendous concern. There is real opportunity for Asia to rise as a region of the world that is in the forefront in terms of prosperity, science, technology, elimination of extreme poverty, illiteracy, in terms of restoring that severely damaged environment. Our rivers, forests, the seas, all of that. But the reality also is that Asia is profoundly divided. Just look at the relationship between Japan, China, and the Republic of Korea, the three economic superpowers of the region. If they were to be able to overcome the suffering and legacy of World War II, of Korean, Japanese occupation of Korea, then the three major economies, they could, together with India, really lift Asia out of poverty, and we could think about, imagine the 21st century, the Asia century. But that probably is a pipe dream. And we look, we have to be honest and frank. India, it possessed nuclear weapons, where the weapons are targeted at, not at Europe, not at the United States, it targets at its neighbor, brother, cousin, Pakistan. And where are the Pakistani nuclear weapons targeted? Not at Russia, not at China or United States, it targets at India. Then we have an almost insurmountable border, land border, maritime border disputes. We have almost insurmountable ethnic and religious conflicts, tensions. So long before Asia as a whole can dream of becoming that, this is the Asia century, we have to get over issues like Stone Age beliefs that still pervasive in parts of Pakistan, Afghanistan, even India. In Pakistan and India, in Afghanistan, where we hear most about the attempts by radical religious groups at negating the dignity of half of the population, women. We know the specific instances that happen time and again. These are not only the issues that appear in the media. The many tens of thousands of women who are abused in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. Then in India, you have the caste system. How on this 21st century, there can be a group of people that in India, in English we call untouchables, that are on the margins of the society. So we have to deal with all of that, overcome that, before a region can say, this is a very civilized region. We are the powers of the 21st century, because power is not only possessing standing armies, nuclear weapons, and industries. You have to be power in philosophy, in humanities, in technical and scientific innovation that has to come as a holistic, integrated approach. You have to free all human beings, so it is, that's why I'm a bit skeptical, and when I hear some academics in Asia talk about the rising Asia, well, I would prefer to think that yes, there is a chance, because the resources are there, liquidity is there, know-how, technology is there, vast pool of people, brain power, but there has to be leaders with vision in Asia that can come together and charter a roadmap for Asia, a 20, 30-year roadmap. But to do that, we do have to resolve some practical issues of agreeing on how to settle the South China Sea dispute. And because that will always interfere with any attempt at Japan, China, Republic of Korea working together. In view of the political constraints in Asia, but also in the rest of the world, governments are short-lived, or governments have short vision, the immediacy of elections. No one does really think about 30 years ahead what the country, Asia, should look like. But then I would say that there is, in this 21st century, policy making and diplomacy are no longer prerogatives of elected or unelected politicians. Civil society, individuals, intellectual thinkers have a greater, say, influence today in shaping national policies and foreign policies. So I believe that Asian people, civil society, could force the hand of the governments to adopt a common strategy. Because I believe such a common strategy that deals with elimination of extreme poverty, of elimination of illiteracy, increasing expenditure on education from childhood to university level, scientific, vocational level. a roadmap on environmental issues, to clean up our rivers, to clean up the lakes, to plant trees, to clean up our seas, restock marine life, corals, all of that. You don't have to have a agreement on other issues before we do it. We still can have unresolved border disputes, maritime border disputes, we can have all of that, but we go for what everybody agree. We set up a fund, an Asian fund on environment and sustainable development, led by countries with more money, China, Japan, Korea, India, etc. There is know-how, so let's work together. And such an exercise could create such a good atmosphere that will make resolution of border disputes easier. So that's how I see it. But I know also that when you're dealing with governments, politicians, it's extremely difficult to provoke new thinking and new policies unless they are forced to. They can be forced to by the power of public opinion, by civil society, when civil society is organized and put pressure and put forward the ideas. I do not see how Japan can back down on its sovereignty claims. Or for that matter, I don't see how the President of Philippines, the President of Korea, or China can back down on their claims. Impossible, politically speaking. So I would suggest forget about trying to find a solution based on sovereignty. Better to look at the region as a potential zone of cooperation, zone of peace for joint development. No one surrendered its claims to those rocks, that area. We declare that area a zone of friendship and cooperation. So the countries that have respective claims, they meet, discuss a joint investment of the area. If there is a lot of oil and gas, maybe that's the reason why they are fighting, they should jointly explore if they need that. And of course, the revenues coming from that area should go to a joint fund. And that joint fund, the revenues from the exploration of the minerals, the wealth of that area, could then be used for the common good of the whole of Asia, with priority going to the neediest countries in Asia, Bangladesh, parts of Pakistan, Nepal, and so many other countries in Asia, Philippines, Indonesia, where there's still much poverty. So that's how they should look at it, rather than thinking that there can be a agreement on sovereignty. I hear about alternatives, International Court of Justice, arbitration, adjudication, assuming in the unlikely scenario that one of the parties, let's say China, agree, we go to the International Court of Justice. And what if the ruling is not in favor of China? It would be a political earthquake in China. So better that for the many, many years to come, decades to come, let's not deal with the issue of sovereign claims. Let's see how we can turn the area either for joint development or no development at all. We don't touch the bottom of the sea. And what we try to do is to make that a peaceful area, try to replenish the fish stock in that area for the benefit of all the countries concerned. our experience is particularly relevant to Japan, to China, to the Republic of Korea, particularly relevant to Myanmar, relevant to Thailand. We had 24 years of occupation by Indonesia. 100,000 to 250,000 people died. Many died of starvation caused by the war, by neglect, by the occupying power. Some died of killing. When we achieved freedom, independence, we said, past is past. We have much to do to save those who are alive, to look after those who are alive. We honor the victims. We try to help their relatives, those who are alive, those who lost parents, brothers, sisters, cousins, friends. But priority is to look after those who are alive. We have to heal the wounds of a traumatized people, traumatized from divisions of the past, traumatized by their experience. But we also have to heal the wounds with Indonesia. If we want secure borders, if we want to be integrated in the region, to have a normal diplomatic relation with all, to be able to have partnerships, cooperation with the rest of the region, we have to manifest with Indonesia. Indonesia is far too important. But also, we have to understand Indonesia's own challenges after the dictatorship. We became free in 98, 99 when Suharto was overthrown by the Indonesian people. So we say the Indonesian people, in overthrowing Suharto, created conditions for us to be free. We would never be free if Suharto would not be overthrown. Who would go to invade Indonesia or East Timor to free us? Look at the situation in Syria today. No one is going to intervene in Syria to free the people of Syria from the Assad regime. Far too complex, delicate. And I totally agree with President Obama, the Americans, the Europeans need to be prudent. You know, you cannot just intervene in a situation where you could only exacerbate it for everybody else. So in East Timor, Indonesia was the same. So we understood Indonesia's challenge in the post-dictatorship. And so we concentrate in healing the wounds internally. That has been tremendously successful. Xanana Guzmán, guerrilla fighter, our leader, prisoner, tremendous moral political authority back then. He was the one who led the whole process, and everybody supported it till this very day. The most successful national conciliation and reconciliation with a former adversary, Indonesia. Well, Burmese probably are doing that today. If you look at the way Aung San Suu Kyi is conducting herself in relation to the military, her speeches have been always very conciliatory. And she talked about restorative justice, not about retributive justice. She hasn't said a word about trials of the military. So that's an example for Myanmar. And it is so the way Indonesia relate to East Timor and the way we relate to Indonesia is a great example of how countries in conflict can overcome the past. I will say this, I dare to say, there are no two countries in Asia that have a better relationship than East Timor and Indonesia. For instance, India and Pakistan don't have better relations than East Timor and Indonesia. China, Korea, Japan don't have a better relationship. And I can mention specifically more countries. So, and yet we are very different. Indonesia, 250 million, we are a bit over 1 million. Indonesia is the largest country with a Muslim population in the world. We are the largest percentage-wise of Catholics in Asia. 97% Catholic, more than the Philippines as percentage of population. We were occupied and 100,000 people died, disappeared. So all the conditions were there for us not to be able to understand each other because we're so different. But no, today we have a fantastic relationship. Government to government, people to people relationship at all levels. But that comes from leadership. Leadership that is credible. You know, if you have a leadership that's not credible, people don't follow. But Shannon Guzman, myself, and other leaders, we share the same philosophy. So we've been able to have today Indonesia as our strongest advocate in ASEAN, to join ASEAN by hopefully next year. If we are not joining next year ASEAN, it's not Indonesia's fault, it's our fault, because we East Timorese, we a bit have this habit of doing things last minute. We are very good at improvising. We are not good in long-term planning. And but the current government is taking it seriously in East Timor. Indonesia is working hard. The foreign minister of Singapore was in Timor a few days ago. He will host a meeting in Singapore with East Timorese officials and others, and other ASEAN experts to see how we can accelerate East Timor preparation to join ASEAN by next year or latest 2014. So far, there is only one major international institution that has gained notoriety, credibility, of which we are all members, and that's the United Nations. And it needs to further strengthen and modernize. There has been talk again and again about reform of the United Nations, particularly of the Security Council. With due respect to the 5 permanent members, they do not represent all of us. How can a country like India, 1 billion people, is out of the Security Council, not as a permanent member? And then you have 2 aging European powers, France and Great Britain, who were great powers maybe 50 years ago, and they are there as permanent members. Or Russia, that lost half of its population with the breakup of the Soviet Union, and also aging, and a permanent member, and not Indonesia, not Brazil, not Egypt, Nigeria. So we have to think, but think intelligently, realistically, how to persuade China, for instance, to share the privilege of being a permanent member of the Security Council with India, let alone with Japan.